The room went silent before the judge even looked up. The line landed in Ethan Whitmore's mind the instant the heavy oak doors swung open. One by one, every whisper inside courtroom 7 dissolved into stillness as Nia Carter stepped through the light in a clean white suit, the fabric catching the late morning sun that spilled through the tall courthouse windows. She did not rush. She never had to. At her side walked 2 little boys, no older than 4, dressed in matching navy coats and polished shoes, their small hands wrapped trustingly around hers. The sound of their footsteps across the marble floor was soft, almost delicate, yet somehow louder than the attorney's voice that had been filling the chamber only seconds before. Ethan's fingers froze around the edge of the witness stand. His lawyer, Victor Hayes, stopped mid-sentence. Even the judge's pen hovered above the page without moving. Because the twins didn't just resemble Ethan. They looked like the childhood portraits framed in the halls of Whitmore Estate. The same storm gray eyes. The same dimple that appeared only when they pressed their lips together in quiet thought. The same unmistakable line of the jaw that had graced magazine covers and financial journals for over a decade. For one suspended second, the courtroom felt less like a place of law and more like a cathedral holding its breath. Nia kept her chin high as she guided the boys to the front row. She did not glance at Ethan, not yet. Her silence carried too much history for wasted gestures. 5 years earlier, he had stood in a penthouse wrapped in city lights and told her, with the cold certainty of a man who believed money could rewrite truth, leave. Whatever this is, it has no place in my life. She had left with nothing but a coat, a folded letter she never got to send, and 2 heartbeats she had not yet heard but somehow already knew existed. Now she had returned dressed in white, not as a woman asking to be heard, but as living proof no one in the room could deny. Victor recovered first, clearing his throat as if sound itself had betrayed him. "Your Honor," he began, voice thinner now, "this is highly irregular." But the judge, an older woman with silver-framed glasses and eyes sharpened by decades of human deception, looked past him and directly at Nia. "Ms. Carter," she said carefully, "do you have standing in this proceeding?" Nia finally stepped forward. Her heels clicked once, crisp and measured. Then she lifted a cream-colored envelope from her handbag, the edges worn from years of being carried through airports, apartments, and sleepless nights. "I believe I do," she said, her voice low, smooth, and unshaken. "This was written the night he threw me out." I followed the letter as she placed it on the clerk's desk. Ethan's stomach tightened. Something about the paper looked familiar, like a ghost from a life he had trained himself not to remember. The boys sat quietly behind her, their legs too short to reach the floor, their expressions calm in the strange way children become when they sense the gravity in adults they trust. One of them, Noah, tilted his head toward Ethan with the exact same analytical stare Ethan himself had worn in boardrooms since he was 30. It hit him harder than any accusation ever could. Nia turned then, finally meeting his eyes. There was no anger in her face. That was what unsettled him most. Anger could be argued with. Anger could be buried in legal language and settlement offers. But dignity like hers stood untouched. "Your mother paid to make sure this never reached you," she said, each word landing like the slow turn of a lock. Across the aisle, Eleanor Whitmore's perfectly composed face lost its color. A ripple moved through the gallery benches where reporters, junior associates, and curious onlookers exchanged stunned glances. The courtroom was no longer listening to the inheritance dispute that had brought Ethan there that morning. It had become something far more dangerous, a public reckoning. The judge adjusted her glasses, eyes narrowing at the envelope, then at the twins, then back to Ethan, who could no longer seem to steady his breath. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, "would you like to explain why 2 children who appear to be your exact likeness are seated in my courtroom?" Ethan opened his mouth, but no answer came. Because for the first time in his life, the truth had entered the room before he had a chance to control it. Ethan Whitmore had negotiated billion-dollar mergers without blinking, but now he stood motionless beneath the courtroom lights, unable to pull his eyes away from the 2 boys seated beside Nia Carter. The silence that had swallowed the room moments earlier had not fully lifted. It lingered in the air, heavy and watchful, as if every person in courtroom 7 understood they were no longer witnessing a simple inheritance dispute. They were watching the collapse of a version of the truth Ethan had built his entire life around. Judge Eleanor Reeves leaned back slightly, her expression unreadable, silver pin resting between her fingers. "Ms. Carter," she said, her tone measured, "this letter may alter the nature of today's proceedings. I will need clarity." Nia gave a single nod. Her movements remained calm, deliberate, untouched by the tremor running through the gallery benches. "5 years ago," she began, "I came to Ethan's penthouse to tell him I was pregnant. Before I could say a word, his mother had already spoken to him." Her eyes shifted briefly toward Eleanor Whitmore, who sat 2 rows behind Ethan in an ivory blazer that now seemed too bright beneath the unforgiving courthouse lights. "She told him I was after the family name, the company, the estate. She told him the pregnancy would be a trap." A murmur rolled through the room. Eleanor straightened, her chin lifting with the brittle confidence of someone who had spent decades controlling outcomes from behind closed doors. "That is absurd," she said sharply. "Your Honor, this woman vanished by choice." Nia did not even look at her. Instead, she unfolded the letter from the envelope with careful hands. The paper trembled only because time had softened its edges, not because she lacked control. "I wrote this the night I left," she said. "I mailed it the next morning." Ethan's throat tightened as the first line was read aloud by the clerk. "Ethan, I never wanted your money. I only wanted you to know your sons deserve the truth." The words landed in the courtroom like a bell struck in an empty church. Sons. Not one child. 2. Ethan's hand tightened around the railing in front of him. A memory flashed through him with painful clarity. The penthouse windows glowing over Manhattan, his mother standing near the fireplace with a glass of sparkling water, her voice cool and certain. "She is manipulating you, Ethan. If you let her stay, she will own your future." He had believed her because trusting his mother had always been easier than trusting uncertainty. But now uncertainty sat 10 feet away in the form of 2 boys with his exact eyes, swinging their polished shoes above the marble floor. Victor Hayes stepped forward, trying to reclaim the procedural order slipping through his fingers. "Your Honor, resemblance is not legal proof." Judge Reeves lifted one brow. "No," she said, "but a suppressed letter, a timeline, and 2 children whose features could be mistaken for a Whitmore family portrait certainly justify further examination." Noah leaned toward his brother and whispered something that made little Naomi smile, and that smile struck Ethan like another revelation. It was not just the dimple. It was the way the child studied the room first, as if measuring the emotional temperature before reacting. It was him. It was painfully, undeniably him. Nia's voice softened, but it did not weaken. "I did not come here for revenge. I came because this case is about legal heirs, and whether Eleanor Whitmore intended it or not, these boys are part of that truth." The room shifted again, this time not with whispers, but with the quiet scratch of reporters' pens and the subtle repositioning of phones beneath the benches. Everyone understood what that meant. If the twins were proven to be Ethan's sons, the entire Whitmore succession case would change. The inheritance, the board votes tied to bloodline trusts, the family foundation, everything. Eleanor Whitmore's composure finally cracked. "This is exactly what she wanted," she snapped, rising halfway from her seat. She waited until the estate hearing to make her move. Nia turned slowly then, her expression almost sorrowful. "No," she said. "I waited until the boys were old enough to understand why their father never came." The words hit harder then. Accusation. Ethan felt something inside him shift, not publicly, not dramatically, but in the private place where regret first learns its own name. Judge Reeves placed both hands on the bench. "I am ordering an immediate paternity review and temporary sealing of the Whitmore succession motion until results are confirmed." A collective breath swept through the room. Ethan looked at Nia, really looked at her for the first time in 5 years, and saw not the woman he had thrown out, but the life he had been kept from by a lie he had once chosen because it was easier than faith. Then Noah looked directly at him and asked in a clear, small voice that carried farther than anyone expected, "Are you really our dad?" And for the first time that morning, Ethan Whitmore had no power to hide behind. The question from Noah hung in the courtroom with a weight no legal motion could soften. Ethan Whitmore stared at the little boy, at the storm gray eyes lifted toward him with innocent patience. And for the first time in years the room around him seemed to lose all structure. The polished oak benches, the marble columns, the whispering reporters, even the judge's bench blurred behind the single truth standing in front of him. Nia remained still beside the boys, one hand resting lightly on Naomi's shoulder, her posture calm but protective. She had not come to force a moment. She had come to allow the truth to arrive on its own feet. Ethan swallowed, his voice rougher than he intended when it finally came. I do not know what I deserve to say right now. The honesty in the sentence shifted the air. Noah's expression did not change, but Naomi leaned slightly closer to Nia, sensing the ache in the adults around her even if she could not yet name it. Judge Reeves adjusted her glasses and spoke with the controlled gravity of someone who had seen family empires rise and fracture under less. Mr. Whitmore, the court will recess for 30 minutes while the emergency paternity authorization is processed. No one is to leave the building. Her gavel struck once, crisp and final. The room erupted the moment protocol allowed it. Reporters rose in a wave of hushed urgency, legal teams clustered into tense circles, and the gallery benches filled with the rustle of speculation. Yet in the center of it all, Nia stood like the only still point in a storm. Ethan stepped down from the witness stand slowly, as if each movement required him to shed the certainty he had worn for years. Victor Hayes moved toward him with a stack of folders pressed to his chest. We need to contain this before the board hears anything, he whispered. Ethan barely looked at him. The board is not the issue anymore. Across the aisle, Eleanor Whitmore remained seated, her face pale beneath the courthouse lights. For the first time, the woman who had controlled every headline tied to the Whitmore name looked smaller than the room itself. Ethan crossed the marble floor, the distance between him and Nia and no more than 20 feet, yet it felt like the measure of 5 lost years. When he stopped in front of her, the boys looked up with quiet curiosity. Naomi's fingers tightened around the sleeve of Nia's white jacket. Ethan lowered himself carefully until he was eye level with them, his expensive suit pressing against the courthouse floor without ceremony. It was the first honest position he had taken all day. I should have found you, he said, not to Nia, not even fully to himself, but to the children who had lived in the silence his absence created. Noah studied him with unsettling seriousness. Mom said the truth takes time, he replied. The simplicity of it landed harder than any accusation. Nia's gaze softened for the first time, though her voice remained steady. I never taught them to hate you, Ethan. He looked up at her then, the years between them suddenly crowded with every moment that should have belonged to the boys. First steps, first words, first birthdays, scraped knees, bedtime questions, school mornings. Things no amount of money could buy back once missed. Why come now? He asked quietly. Nia exhaled, her eyes drifting toward the tall courthouse windows where winter lights spilled in pale silver across the marble. Because your mother turned this inheritance hearing into a fight over legacy, she said. And whether anyone likes it or not, legacy has names. Behind them, Eleanor finally rose from her seat, one gloved hand gripping the bench for balance. Ethan, she called, her voice sharper than before. Do not let emotion destroy everything your father built. Ethan turned slowly, something colder and clearer settling into his expression. No, he said, his voice low but carrying across the chamber. What destroys it is a lie that kept my sons from me. The courtroom stilled again. Even Victor Hayes stopped moving. Judge Reeves had not yet returned, but the silence felt just as official. Eleanor's face tightened. I protected this family. Nia answered before Ethan could. You protected control. The words landed with the finality of a verdict. Then the bailiff stepped forward from the side chamber, holding a sealed envelope marked expedited review authorization. The first step toward proof had begun. Ethan looked back at Noah and Naomi, both children now watching him not with fear, but with the quiet patience of lives that had been built without promises. He reached into his pocket, removed the silver family signet ring he had worn since his father died, and closed it in his palm. For the first time, the symbol of the Whitmore name did not feel like power. It felt like a debt. And as the lab courier entered through the rear courtroom doors, Ethan understood with a clarity that stole the breath from his chest that the real trial had never been about the estate at all. It was about whether the truth had arrived too late to still be called mercy. By the time Judge Reeves returned to the bench, the atmosphere inside courtroom 7 had changed completely. The inheritance case that had once dominated the docket now felt like background noise beneath the far greater tension pressing against every polished surface in the room. Winter light spilled through the tall courthouse windows, washing the marble floor in pale silver, and in that cold brightness Nia Carter remained seated with Noah and Naomi beside her, both children calm in the way only deeply loved children could be. Ethan Whitmore stood several feet away, no longer near his legal team, no longer shielded by Victor Hayes or the neat stacks of succession documents. Waiting on the council table, for the first time in years, he looked like a man standing outside the empire that had once defined him. The bailiff handed the sealed authorization packet to the clerk, who moved it toward the bench. Judge Reeves reviewed the top page, then lifted her eyes toward the room. "The court has approved immediate expedited testing," she said. "Results will be processed within the hour." A breath moved through the chamber, collective and restrained, but sharp enough to remind everyone that the next 60 minutes would alter the Whitmore legacy forever. Eleanor Whitmore rose before anyone else could speak. Her posture was still elegant, but the precision that once made her presence intimidating now carried a faint tremor. "Your Honor, this is unnecessary. We are allowing a woman with perfect timing to destabilize an estate hearing built on decades of legal planning." Nia did not rise. She simply looked at Eleanor with the kind of calm that made every defensive word sound louder than it should. "The timing was chosen by your motion to define bloodline heirs," she said evenly. "I am only here because you made legacy the center of the room." The judge's expression hardened. "Mrs. Whitmore, if these children are connected to the succession line, then their standing is not disruption. It is relevance." Eleanor's lips parted, but no reply came. For once, the architecture of power she had built around herself offered no immediate shelter. The bailiff approached Nia first, kneeling to speak gently to the twins. Noah listened carefully, then nodded with a seriousness beyond his years. Naomi glanced at Nia, and when her mother gave a soft, reassuring smile, she extended her hand without fear. The simple trust in that moment struck Ethan harder than any legal revelation. These children had been raised with steadiness, not bitterness. Nia had protected more than their future. She had protected their innocence. As the bailiff completed the collection process, the room settled into an uneasy hush. Reporters remained in their seats, pens poised, phones angled low beneath the benches, each person sensing they were witnessing something far larger than family. Law. Ethan crossed the aisle again, slower this time, stopping beside the row where Nia sat. He did not ask permission to speak. He simply stood there, looking at Noah and Naomi as if memorizing every detail the way a starving man memorizes the sight of bread. Naomi tilted her head. "Mom says people show who they are when they are scared," she said softly. Ethan blinked, caught off guard by the child's clarity. "And what do you think I am showing right now?" he asked. Noah answered before his sister could. "That you are sorry." The honesty of it nearly took the air from him. Nia's gaze stayed forward, but her voice came low enough for only him to hear. They learned to tell the truth without punishing people for it. Ethan lowered himself into the empty seat across the aisle, close enough to remain part of the moment, far enough not to intrude on the safety she had built around them. The courthouse clock above the rear doors ticked louder than before, every second sharpening the weight of what was coming. Across the chamber, Victor Hayes was already fielding whispered calls from Whitmore board members, the words trust, shares, and succession drifting in tense fragments through the air. The legal consequences were beginning to spread beyond the courtroom walls, moving toward the towers downtown, where Whitmore Holdings had long operated like a kingdom. Yet Ethan found himself no longer thinking about board votes or trust structures. His focus remained on the twins, on the way Noah folded his hands the exact way Ethan did during negotiations, on the way Naomi's quiet observation mirrored the woman sitting beside her. They were not interruptions to his life. They were the part of it he had been denied. Then the side chamber door opened, and the lab courier returned much sooner than expected, a slim white packet and hand-marked priority confirmation. The room froze all over again. Judge Reeves accepted the packet personally, broke the seal with practiced calm, and lowered her eyes to the printed page. The silence that followed stretched long enough for every heartbeat in the room to feel amplified. Then she lifted her gaze directly to Ethan, and in her measured. expression he saw the end of every lie his family had hidden behind wealth, reputation, and time. Judge Reeves did not rush the moment. Her silver-framed glasses caught the pale courthouse light as her eyes moved once more across the printed page, and the stillness inside courtroom 7 became so complete that even the faint hum of the heating vents seemed too loud. Ethan Whitmore stood motionless, every instinct in him demanding certainty, while every second before the words felt like punishment. Nia remained seated beside Noah and Naomi, one hand resting lightly across the back of the bench behind them, her composure untouched, not because the moment was easy, but because she had already lived the truth long before the court was ready to meet it. Then Judge Reeves lifted her head. The expedited review confirms a probability of paternity exceeding 99.9%. The words landed with the clean finality of law. A wave of stunned breath swept through the room. Reporters looked at one another in disbelief before their pens began racing across paper. Victor Hayes lowered his phone slowly, his legal strategy dissolving in real time. Across the chamber, Eleanor Whitmore gripped the edge of the bench, her polished posture finally breaking beneath the weight of what she could no longer deny. But Ethan heard none of it clearly. The only sound that remained sharp was the soft inhale Noah made as he looked up at him, waiting not for legal confirmation, but for something far more human. Ethan crossed the aisle without hesitation. The distance that had once felt impossible now vanished beneath measured footsteps on marble. When he reached the twins, he lowered himself again to their eye level. No courtroom performance left in him, no public image to maintain. Just a man staring into the faces of the children who had carried his features through years he had never been allowed to witness. "Yes," he said, his voice rough but steady. "I am your father." Naomi studied him for a moment, then asked with the pure seriousness only a child can hold, "Then why were you not there for our birthday cakes?" The question broke something inside him more completely than the paternity results ever could, not because it accused him, but because it revealed the ordinary moments he had missed. Frosting on little fingers, candles glowing in a dark room, wishes whispered before bedtime, memories that belonged to every year he had spent believing the wrong story. Ethan looked at Nia, the ache in his chest finally taking shape as regret. "I should have been there for all of it." Nia met his gaze, calm and unreadable, but there was no cruelty in her face. "The boys do not need apologies made to the room," she said softly. "They need consistency made to their lives." Judge Reeves leaned forward slightly, allowing the emotional truth of the moment to settle before bringing the legal reality back into focus. In light of the confirmed results, Noah and Naomi Carter Whitmore are recognized as direct biological heirs pending formal trust review. Another ripple moved through the courtroom, this one heavier with financial implication. The Whitmore succession line had changed in a single sentence. Board control clauses, voting shares, charitable trusts, and legacy provisions tied to bloodline now had two new names. The empire Eleanor had spent decades structuring around controlled inheritance now belonged, in part, to the very children she had tried to erase from its history. Eleanor rose abruptly, her voice sharpened by desperation rather than authority. "This cannot happen. They are children. They know nothing about what this family built." Nia stood then, white suit catching the cold silver light from the windows, her presence quiet but absolute. "They know honesty," she said. "That is already more than enough." The room fell silent again. Even Judge Reeves allowed the truth in those words to hang unchallenged. Ethan turned slowly toward his mother, and for the first time there was no hesitation in his voice. "You stole 5 years from them," he said. "And from me." Eleanor's lips parted, but whatever defense she had rehearsed through years of power and influence no longer seemed to fit the room. Her silence was the first honest thing she had offered all morning. Noah reached out then, small fingers brushing the cuff of Ethan's sleeve. It was not trust yet. It was curiosity. A beginning. Ethan looked down at the tiny hand against his tailored jacket and felt the full weight of what fatherhood truly meant. Not wealth. Not inheritance. Presence. Naomi leaned against Nia's side, watching the adults with wide, thoughtful eyes. "Does this mean he comes to the next birthday?" she asked. A faint sound of restrained emotion moved through the courtroom. Not laughter exactly, but something warmer, softer, more human than anything the inheritance hearing had planned for. Ethan's answer came without delay. "If your mother allows it," he said, looking at Nia with a humility the room had never before seen from him. "I will be there for everyone she gives me." And as the reporters scribbled what they believed was the biggest legal turn of the year, the real shift happened in silence. In the space between a father kneeling on courthouse marble and two children deciding whether the truth had arrived in time to become a future. The silence that followed Naomi's question did not feel heavy anymore. It felt fragile, like the first layer of ice beginning to thaw after a long winter. Courtroom 7, once charged with inheritance clauses and family trust disputes, had become something far more intimate. Beneath the pale wash of afternoon light spilling through the tall windows, Ethan Whitmore remained kneeling on the marble floor, his tailored suit no longer carrying the armor it once had. Noah and Naomi stood close enough now that the distance between stranger and father had narrowed into something uncertain but possible. Judge Reeves reviewed the updated succession notes while allowing the emotional reality of the moment to unfold without interruption. She had seen enough family cases to know that law could confirm blood, but only time could confirm belonging. Nia Carter stood beside the twins, still composed in white, her calm presence the anchor that had carried the children safely to this moment. Ethan looked up at her, and for the first time there was no boardroom calculation in his eyes, only a kind of careful humility. "I know I cannot ask for trust in a single day," he said quietly, "but I want to begin somewhere. Honest." Nia studied him for a long moment, measuring not his words, but the absence of arrogance behind them. "Then begin with truth," she answered. "Not promises. Presence." The words settled into him like a directive stronger than any court order. Across the chamber, Victor Hayes was already speaking in hushed tones with Whitmore Holdings counsel about emergency amendments to the family trust. The legal implications had become impossible to ignore. Two newly confirmed heirs meant voting structures would shift, dormant trust clauses would activate, and the charitable foundation Ethan's late father built would now recognize Noah and Naomi as future beneficiaries. Yet the larger shift was happening in the quieter spaces no attorney could manage. Noah took one careful step toward Ethan. "Do you know how to build model rockets?" he asked, his gray eyes bright with cautious curiosity. Ethan blinked, surprised by the question and by the ordinary hope tucked inside it. "I used to build them with my father when I was your age," he said. Noah glanced at Naomi, then back at him. "Mine goes almost 6 feet. For the first time that day, something like a genuine smile touched Ethan's face, small and uncertain, but real. "Then I would like to see the next launch." Naomi tilted her head, curls catching the silver courthouse light. "Mom says people mean what they repeat." Nia's eyes softened slightly at that, though she said nothing. The lesson had not been designed for this room, yet it fit perfectly. Ethan nodded, accepting the weight behind the child's words. "Then I will repeat it with what I do." The side doors opened, and a clerk approached Judge Reeves with the revised trust motion. After a brief review, the judge spoke clearly enough for every person in the room to hear. "The Whitmore succession hearing is hereby continued pending full integration of the newly confirmed heirs into all legacy and voting structures. Temporary protections are granted to Ms. Carter and the minors to prevent any retaliatory interference from family representatives or board members." The order was procedural, but the effect was unmistakable. Eleanor Whitmore, still standing near the rear bench, closed her eyes briefly as if the legal finality had reached a place denial no longer could. She stepped forward, her voice lower now, stripped of the polished certainty that had once ruled every room she entered. "Nia," she said, "I believed I was protecting the company." Nia turned, her expression calm but firm. "You protected an image," she replied. "I protected children." The distinction left no room for argument. Eleanor looked toward the twins, her face touched by something that resembled regret, though far too late to resemble healing. Ethan rose slowly from the floor, but he did not move away from Noah and Naomi. Instead, he remained beside them as if choosing his place in the room for the first time rather than inheriting it. Judge Reeves gathered the case files into a single stack. "This court recognizes that legal truth has now been established," she said. "What remains is the human work beyond this room." No one spoke after that because there was nothing left to add that law could improve. Nia reached for the twins' hands, preparing to leave, And for one suspended second, Ethan feared the door between past and future might close again before he learned how to step through it. Then Noah looked up and said, with the simple authority only children possess, "The rocket launch is Saturday in Brooklyn. 10 in the morning. Do not be late." The room exhaled in a warmth far removed from the cold legal tension that had opened the day. Ethan's answer came softly, but with a steadiness that reached all the way to Nia. "I will be there at 9:30. And as the courthouse doors opened to the fading gold of the city outside, the legacy everyone thought had been decided by blood and wealth quietly began to rebuild itself around something far rarer, a second chance earned in truth. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of Brooklyn sunlight that made everything feel sharper, cleaner, almost new. The sky stretched bright and pale above Prospect Park, the grass still carrying traces of dew that shimmered like glass beneath the 10 o'clock sun. Ethan Whitmore had been there since 9:15. He stood near the open field in a navy wool coat, hands tucked into his pockets against the cool spring breeze, a long silver rocket case resting beside him on the bench. For a man who had once made billion-dollar decisions without arriving early to anything, the fact that he was already there felt less like punctuality and more like repentance. Across the lawn, Nia Carter appeared with Noah and Naomi, both children bundled in matching windbreakers, their curls catching the morning light as they ran ahead with the unfiltered excitement only children carried so effortlessly. Noah spotted Ethan first and slowed, almost as if surprised that a promise had turned into a person. "You came before me," he said, a trace of wonder in his voice. Ethan crouched to meet his eyes. "I told you I would be here at 9:30. I figured I should beat my own promise." Noah nodded solemnly, as though filing the moment away in some private ledger of trust. Naomi tilted her head toward the silver case. "What is that?" she asked. Ethan's expression softened. "Something my father gave me when I was 7, he said. "I rebuilt it this week." He opened the case slowly, revealing a sleek model rocket painted white with deep blue stripes, the Whitmore family crest carefully removed from the nose cone and replaced with 2 hand-painted initials. N and N. Noah's eyes widened. Naomi touched the painted letters with careful fingers. Nia stood a few feet away, watching in silence. She had expected him to come. She had not expected him to come carrying history reshaped into something meant for the children instead of the family name. Ethan looked up at her, the quiet between them different now. Not empty. Measured. Earned. "I thought it should belong to the right future," he said. Nia gave the smallest nod, the kind that said she had noticed the difference between symbolism and sincerity. The field slowly filled with other families, children laughing, parents unfolding chairs, the occasional dog darting through the grass chasing sounds only it could hear. But in the center of the open space, the 4 of them moved into a quieter orbit. Ethan helped Noah fit the rocket onto the small launch stand while Naomi carefully held the remote igniter with both hands. "You count," Ethan said. Naomi grinned, her dimples flashing in a way that looked so much like him it still caught in his chest. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The rocket lifted with a clean hiss, streaking upward through the bright blue sky, climbing higher than 6 feet, higher than the trees, higher than Noah had ever managed alone. The children shouted in delight as the white parachute burst open against the sunlight, drifting slowly back toward the field. Ethan laughed then, a sound so unguarded that Nia found herself looking at him differently, not as the man in the penthouse 5 years ago, but as the father learning how to arrive in the ordinary moments that mattered most. Noah ran after the descending rocket, Naomi racing behind him, their laughter trailing across the grass like music. Ethan remained beside Nia, both of them watching the twins cut through the sunlight. "I missed so much," he said quietly. Nia folded her arms against the breeze, eyes still on the children. "Yes," she answered, not cruel, only truthful. He nodded, accepting the weight of it. "I cannot change the years." "No," she said softly, "but you can decide what the next one looks like." The words settled between them with the same clarity the courthouse truth had carried. Only this time the stakes felt warmer. "Human." Ethan glanced at her, then back at the twins. "I already moved the board meeting I had this morning." A faint smile touched her lips. "For a rocket launch." He shook his head. "For Noah and Naomi." Across the field, the twins returned breathless, The recovered rocket clutched triumphantly in Noah's hands. Naomi slipped her smaller hand into Ethan's without hesitation this time. The gesture so natural it nearly stole the breath from him. There was no dramatic forgiveness in it. Just trust beginning where consistency had shown up twice. Noah looked up, cheeks flushed pink from the run. "Next Saturday, we build the bigger one," he said. Ethan squeezed the little hand in his. "Then next Saturday, I am here again." Nia watched the children move between them with growing ease, and for the first time since the courthouse, she allowed herself to imagine something beyond legal. Truth and inherited names. Not romance. Not restoration of the past. Something steadier. A family shape built forward instead of backward. As the spring wind lifted Naomi's curls and the white rocket gleamed in Noah's hands beneath the Brooklyn sun, the real inheritance of the Whitmore name no longer looked like board seats or trust clauses. It looked like a father showing up early to a field, a mother strong enough to protect dignity without poisoning love, and two children learning that sometimes the truth does not just return what was lost. Sometimes it teaches everyone how to build something better in its place. The following Saturday unfolded beneath a soft Manhattan gray, the kind of overcast sky that turned the city glass into silver mirrors. Ethan Whitmore stood outside the Brooklyn brownstone 10 minutes early again, this time holding not a rocket case, but a flat white bakery box tied with navy ribbon. The smell of vanilla frosting drifted faintly through the cool spring air. He had learned from Noah that today was not just another launch day. It was the twins' half-birthday tradition, a small celebration Nia had started after the year they turned 3 because Noah once decided waiting 12 full months between cakes was a bad system. When the front door opened, Naomi appeared first, curls loose around her cheeks, eyes instantly falling to the ribbon. "You remembered cake day," she said, wonder softening every word. Ethan knelt and handed her the box. Chocolate on one side, vanilla on the other. Noah said compromise matters. Noah appeared behind her with a grin that looked too much like Ethan's childhood photographs to ignore. "That means Mom told you about our rule." Ethan glanced up as Nia stepped into the doorway, dressed in a cream sweater and dark jeans, the ordinary warmth of home around her somehow more striking than the courthouse white from the week before. "No," Ethan said, standing slowly. "He told me himself on Wednesday when we were choosing launch parts." The fact that there had already been a Wednesday between them made the moment land differently. Not dramatic, just consistent. Nia noticed it too. The children tugged Ethan inside, before silence could grow too thoughtful. The brownstone smelled of cinnamon tea and fresh laundry, a quiet life built from routines rather than spectacle. Family photos lined the hallway wall, most of them of the twins at different ages. Missing teeth, Halloween costumes, first day of school smiles, tiny hands clutching oversized science fair ribbons. Ethan slowed as he passed them, the ordinary history of his children stretching in frames he had never stood beside. Nia watched from the kitchen doorway, not with pity, but with the steady understanding that some grief arrives only when joy makes room for it. "I saved the school ones digitally," she said softly, "in case someday they wanted to show you." He turned toward her, the weight of her quiet generosity settling into him. "You really never poisoned them against me." She shook her head. Children deserve the truth, not the bitterness that adults attach to it. Before he could answer, Noah grabbed his sleeve. "Rocket first, then cake. That is the law." The launch this time happened from the brownstone rooftop, where the skyline opened wide and the East River glimmered in the distance beneath the clouded light. Ethan helped the twins assemble the larger rocket, nearly 3 feet tall, white with deep blue fins, and both of their names painted down the side in Naomi's careful handwriting. When Noah handed Ethan the final screw cap without hesitation, it felt like something deeper than teamwork. It felt like trust becoming muscle memory. "You do the countdown with us this time," Naomi said, placing the igniter between all 3 of their hands. Nia stood a few feet back near the rooftop railing, the wind lifting loose strands of her hair as she watched them lean in together. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The rocket shot upward in a clean line through the silver sky, cutting past the rooftop edge and disappearing for one breathless second into the low clouds before the bright parachute opened above the skyline. The twins screamed in delight, their laughter bouncing off brick and glass. Ethan laughed with them, not as a guest in the moment anymore, but as part of the sound itself. When the rocket drifted down onto the neighboring rooftop garden, Noah threw both arms around Ethan's waist without thinking. The hug lasted only a second, instinctive and fast, but it stilled the entire world inside Ethan's chest. Nia saw it too. The quiet shift was no longer potential. It was happening. Back downstairs, the half-birthday cake sat glowing with 6 small candles, 3 on each frosted side. Naomi looked at Ethan seriously before the candles were lit. Mom says wishes only work if everyone at the table belongs. The words settled into the warm kitchen light with a truth no courtroom could have formalized. Nia placed the plates down slowly, then met Ethan's eyes across the table. "Then sit," she said. It was a simple invitation, but it carried more meaning than forgiveness ever could. Ethan took the seat between Noah and Naomi as the candlelight reflected in their storm-gray eyes. Together they counted, together they blew out the candles, and in that burst of warm sugar-scented air, the missing years did not disappear. But they stopped defining the room. Later, as the children argued cheerfully over which rocket design should come next, Ethan stood beside Nia at the kitchen counter while rain began to tap softly against the brownstone windows. "I know this is not easy for you," he said quietly. Nia looked toward the twins, then back at him. "Easy was never the goal," she said. "Safe was." Ethan nodded, understanding at last that love in this house had always been built through steadiness, not speeches. And as the rain blurred the city lights beyond the glass, the family everyone once thought had been erased quietly gathered around cake crumbs, rocket sketches, and the kind of ordinary belonging that made even lost years feel less final. 3 weeks later, the Whitmore Foundation Gala shimmered above Manhattan in a glass-walled ballroom 60 floors above the city, the skyline glowing in gold and midnight blue beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. Crystal chandeliers cast soft light over polished marble, and every name that mattered in finance, philanthropy, and old New York legacy stood beneath it. But for Ethan Whitmore, none of it carried the weight it once had. Tonight was not about market confidence or board optics. It was about showing up in the one place his family name had always valued most, public legacy. The ballroom doors opened, and conversation softened into a hush that felt strikingly familiar. Nia Carter stepped inside wearing white again, not the sharp courthouse suit from the day Truth cracked open, but a flowing ivory gown that moved like quiet light across the floor. At her side walked Noah and Naomi in matching navy formal wear, each child holding one of her hands with the same easy certainty they now carried everywhere Ethan stood. Heads turned, phones lowered discreetly. The room did not stare because of scandal this time. It stared because dignity had returned and become impossible to ignore. Ethan crossed the ballroom before anyone else could intercept the moment. He did not pause for investors, trustees, or the quiet murmur of names following behind him. He stopped in front of the twins first, adjusting Noah's tie and smoothing the ribbon in Naomi's curls with a tenderness that still surprised even him. "You both look more ready for this room than I ever was," he said. Naomi smiled. "Mom said the room only matters if the people in it do." Ethan glanced at Nia, and something warm passed between them, no longer fragile, no longer uncertain. Not romance reborn, but respect matured into trust. The gala host moved to the stage, tapping the microphone gently. "Ladies and gentlemen, before tonight's education initiative announcement, Mr. Whitmore has requested a family acknowledgement." The room turned fully toward the stage. Ethan had once ruled these moments with effortless polish, every phrase measured for shareholder confidence. Tonight his voice carried something rarer, truth without performance. He stepped to the podium, the skyline behind him blazing in silver and gold. "For years," he began, "I believed legacy was something built in boardrooms, protected by contracts, and measured in assets." His gaze moved to Noah and Naomi, standing beside Nia near the front of the ballroom. "I was wrong. Legacy is presence. It is who you show up for when no cameras are watching. It is the people whose birthdays, science fairs, rooftop rocket launches, and half-cakes teach you what wealth never could." The room had gone still, every executive and donor held by the gravity of a man rewriting the meaning of his own name in public. Ethan continued, his voice steadier with every word. "Tonight, the Whitmore Foundation Trust is being formally restructured. Noah and Naomi will be named future education fellows and protected beneficiaries, and all legacy voting structures will reflect the truth this family should have honored from the beginning. A murmur rippled through the ballroom, but it was not resistance. It was recognition. Public truth had completed what the courtroom began. Across the room, Eleanor Whitmore stood near the rear table, her face touched by the softest expression Nia had ever seen on her. It was not power. It was surrender to truth. She did not approach the stage. She simply placed one hand over her heart and gave the smallest nod toward the twins, the first gesture in years that asked for nothing in return. Noah leaned toward Nia. Does this mean our rockets are foundation science projects now? Nia laughed softly, and the sound carried something lighter than any of the rooms that had come before. Ethan smiled from the podium. It means your ideas matter here. After the applause, warm and genuine, the quartet resumed playing and the ballroom slowly returned to motion. But the night had already shifted. Near the glass windows overlooking the Hudson, the twins pressed their palms against the cool pane, naming bridges and lights while Ethan stood beside them, pointing out the ferry routes like bedtime constellations. Nia joined them, her reflection in the glass standing beside his and the children's. All four shapes finally aligned in the city light. You changed the trust publicly, she said quietly. Ethan nodded. Some truths deserve witnesses. Noah turned, holding the small white rocket keychain Ethan had given him after the speech. Next gala, we bring the real rocket. Naomi grinned. And cake. Ethan laughed, the sound warm against the music and city glow. Then next gala, we make room for both. Nia looked at the children framed by Manhattan's lights, then at Ethan. Standing exactly where he said he would be, not just in parks and rooftops now, but in the most public room his world had to offer. The comeback had never been about revenge. It had been about proof. Proof that dignity can outlast rejection. Proof that children can become the living architecture of truth. Proof that a man who once inherited power could still learn to earn belonging. And as the city glittered beyond the glass and the twins traced imagined rocket paths across the skyline, the Whitmore legacy no longer lived in vaults, votes, or marble halls. It lived in the quiet certainty of four reflections in the window, standing together where silence had finally become peace.